Welcome in Rose City to Soccer Made in Portland. I'm Ryan Clark, joined by Chris Reifer. We are on the eve of the U.S. women's national team opening up their World Cup journey. The World Cup started last night with Australia and New Zealand.
Technically this morning.
Yes, technically this morning, our time, but last night in Australia and New Zealand. Both 1-0 wins for the two host squads, and an exciting start, albeit with a very serious and unfortunate backdrop of the mass shooting event that happened in Auckland, New Zealand, which two people lost their lives, and it was a scary situation considering the distance from the World Cup teams' hotels and how many fans are traversing in that area. So obviously thoughts with the people of New Zealand as they get started with the World Cup there under unique and unfortunate circumstances. But on the field, there's plenty to watch in the coming days, and plenty of Portland Thorns players who will be taking center stage, including the first being Canada tonight facing Nigeria. So that'll be Christine Sinclair and company, Adriana Leon, former Thorn now.
That's right. Old friend. New old friend.
Old friend. Yes. Old friend for 4 months, Adriana Leon. They'll be taking on Nigeria tonight, and then obviously U.S. tomorrow. Got Costa Rica on tap, Japan on tap for their matches at varying hours of the night, if you're so inclined to stay up. So exciting times for sure with the World Cup starting, but no Thorns games, at least not until tomorrow. One of them
going head to head.
Going head to head with the U.S. basically, because the Thorns play at 7:30 at Providence Park. Challenge Cup match
during the second half of the U.S. women's national team game.
That's right.
We'll talk about that in a few moments.
We will, because that conflict is difficult for people in Portland who both want to attend that watch party that the Sports Bra and PCFC are hosting over at Pioneer Courthouse Square. And also they kind of want to go to the game, right? Like, even though it's Challenge Cup and, the Thorns don't really have a terribly good chance of winning their group or being the best second place finishing team, they'd like to get over there. But, the World Cup is here, Chris. And what's the general vibe for you and feeling as we get rolling here?
Well, certainly a scary and sobering start to the World Cup. You said one word, though, that I disagree with. At least I disagree with it in a certain context. You called it unique. And certainly an unusual event in New Zealand. Nothing unique about that in the United States. And that is something with which we are all too familiar. And it is scary in the context in which it happened, and unnerving in the context in which it happened. But when you zoom out and you look at the broader picture, it is certainly sobering on a different level here in the United States. Yeah, obviously, and certainly my thoughts are with all who are affected. But it is yet another reminder of these issues and how they impact us in all sorts of different kinds of ways and in all different parts of our lives. And so it was a sobering start to what is, I think, the most exciting World Cup ever. This is the most open Women's World Cup ever. I think there are genuinely 4 or 5 favorites, strong favorites, with another pack of dark horses out of which you could certainly see a team emerging if they have a good tournament. And so I think this is going to be the most exciting World Cup ever. I think the U.S. are real contenders, but especially because of some of their absences, are far from shoe-ins. Shoe-ins. I don't know. And so, I think this is great stuff. This is the kind of stuff that's worth staying up late or getting up early for. Or if you happen to get one of the early games, enjoying over dinner. But this is going to be a phenomenal World Cup, and folks should absolutely tune in. And there should be every bit of buzz. So if you are so inclined, go check out the watch party. The game against Vietnam probably leaves a little bit to be desired on the competitive end. It should be one that the U.S. women's national team can handle. But nonetheless, it is going to be a huge tournament, and it is the U.S.'s kickoff to a huge tournament. But they are not the only people watching the World Cup, working at all hours of the day. Ryan T. Clark. The business of journalism never sleeps, my friend. 6 a.m. this morning. 6 a.m. I'm like, my alarm clock is going off. I reach into my phone because my phone is my alarm clock, as is the case with most millennials. We don't really own alarm clocks. No, that is not a useful appliance anymore. I'm reaching, my phone's going off. I'm turning that off. I open up my phone. There's Ryan T. Clark just dropping a piece of journalism before dawn. Why don't you take it from there?
Yeah. So, 6 a.m. this morning it was when that story posted. That's something we like to do just for context for people who are unfamiliar with the process that, the Oregonian goes through with some stories. Posting at 6 a.m. Pacific, 9 a.m. Eastern allows for a really wide window in both time zones for folks to, view the story and to absorb it. And, this story was about the Portland Thorns players speaking out and saying the obvious, something that people have known for a while, that they have fought for a while, that they want a grass field at Providence Park, that they want a dedicated training facility, and they deserve one, that is equitable to the Portland Timbers, and provides the necessary things that they need. And, within that story, we found out, through that reporting, that the club at this point has narrowed down to 2 potential sites in Portland for a practice facility for the Thorns, which is a big step and a necessary one for the club. As the NWSL continues to grow, as players continue to speak out more frequently and vociferously on this issue. And yeah, I posted the story at 6 a.m., but some people are awake by then. I wake up at 5:30 every day because my fiance Emma, who works in construction, she likes to be there early with all the guys who are there obscenely early on the job site that she works at, and she's a project manager. So leaders being there in solidarity with their employees, I think is absolutely a positive trait. The trouble is it makes it so because we have 3 dogs and because I can't just let them run around by themselves downstairs, I get up with her and I'm up at 5:30 every morning, which is I'd like to say it's getting easier, but after a weekend or maybe a late night at the park covering the Timbers or Thorns,
it comes early.
It's not very easy. It's a little rough, for sure.
Your dog's morning routine, especially weekday morning routine, is very different from Jerry, my dog. Jerry's like weekday routine. He is a big weekday sleep in dog. Like he has to get up because he's got to get his morning walk and stuff in. But he is after the walk, after breakfast, straight back to bed. Would far prefer to sleep in on weekdays. On weekends, it's like he knows he understands the calendar, the days of the week and the like. On weekends, he's like 6 a.m. He's like, hey, we got a big day. Let's go. And so that's great for me. When I have to get up to tend to my responsibilities on weekdays. Nonetheless, we digress. So yeah, a few bits of news. First being following Lindsay Horan's comments. What was it last week? To Sebi Salazar on ESPN. I think a couple Thorns, Bella Bixby and Megan Klingenberg, to whom you spoke, also didn't mince words about this and were very direct about the fact that this is overdue, that this is something that they need. I think the word that Kling used was unanimous, that this is something that the team needs. I think you rightly point out that the data is mixed with respect to serious injuries on turf fields versus grass fields, and so I'm certainly not qualified to wade into that. But I think you also have to listen to the players that their experience is just that setting aside serious injuries, just on a day-to-day level. I mean, this is what Horan said. I think Bixby and Kling made similar points. that it just on a day-to-day level takes a bigger toll. And that matters, right? Especially when it's your training field. And I actually think there are a couple issues here, even though they are definitely related. But there are a couple issues here. One is getting the Thorns a training surface that is grass, which in many ways, in terms of kind of that day-to-day stuff, is more important than their competitive surface. Because, they're on the training pitch 5-6 times as much as they're on the competitive surface, right? And so if you got them a grass training field like the Timbers have, just as an aside, if you got them a grass training field, that would be a really, really significant improvement in this respect, even if you didn't get a grass surface at Providence Park. I think both should happen. There has been talk of both for a long time. And I think we're sort of past the point of patience, to get slightly and unintentionally alliterative, with these issues. I mean, these are issues that, we've been talking about since the Timbers came to MLS, let alone the Thorns in NWSL in 2013. And they still haven't happened. Here we are 12 years later on the Timbers side and 10 years later on the Thorns side. And they need to happen. In terms of, the club narrowing things down to a couple sites, I genuinely don't know how much news that is. There have been sites bandied about over the course of the years. There's been talk of Delta Park. There's been talk of a few other places. And so I don't know how much news that is. I don't know how imminent that suggests this is. I think I interpreted the club statement to you as being a little bit ambiguous on that front. And so I genuinely don't quite know what to make of that, whether that really is a sign of true progress, or if it's sort of just another way of saying that we're in about the same place we've been for the last few years on this. And so we'll see about that. But the obvious question, and I pointed this out on Twitter, I think Bill Oram, our good friend and your colleague, my colleague is as well, I suppose, pointed this out as well. But I mean, that's an awkward thing, to the extent that this is something that's sort of imminently moving forward. That's a really awkward thing, given that we have a lame duck situation with ownership. That's an enormous decision. I mean, that is a sort of club level decision that, I think probably would only be surpassed by if they decided to build a new stadium in terms of significance. And if you're going to be having new ownership, theoretically, imminently, I say theoretically because I don't know the status of that, and I don't think anybody outside of a select few do. It just begs the question, why isn't that decision being held for new ownership, who are theoretically going to be in a position and motivated to make a really significant investment in the club, rather than doing something? I use the phrase lame duck. That's the phrase we use for a Congress after an election, but before the new Congress is sworn in. And that just describes the situation that we're in now with ownership. And it would be like if Congress in a lame duck session went out and passed, enormous, huge, big controversial legislation. I think people would stop and say, "Hey, wait a minute! You're not the folks we just selected." And I think that this situation begs some of those questions as well. There's a big countervailing interest, though, which is that the Thorns urgently need a new training facility. We are overdue. They needed this yesterday. They needed this last week. They needed this last year, right? And in light of the lack of information about when an ownership transition is actually going to happen, do you want to wait? I don't know. If that ownership transition is going to happen in a couple months, yeah, probably, because that seems to me to be a decision for the next group. If it's going to be a couple of years, I certainly know how the Thorns players would feel about that. And so I think those are difficult questions and are fairly greeted with a good amount of ambivalence. But, it is a huge point. It should be a huge talking point. uh, both in terms of the overall question about what happens with the Thorns training facility and who should be making that decision. And that's sort of where we are. But big reporting from you on that this morning. Good job getting a couple Thorns to speak very candidly with you about it. I think that's really important, and I think this is something that needs to continue to be on the tips of everybody's tongue as we go through this transitional period within the club.
And speaking to the ownership issue and how that weaves into this decision making, the timing of everything, I think an important piece of what a Timber spokesperson provided to me in that statement was that this is something that they are moving forward on, in their words, regardless of the timeline of identifying a buyer for the club, for the Thorns. That signals to me, as someone on the outside, that this is the immediate priority for Merritt Paulson before the sale is completed. And sure, he and the people around him who are helping lead the sale, Heather Davis and others in the organization, they can walk and chew gum at the same time, right? But those are two massive endeavors and are inextricably linked, because the next owners are either going to inherit the project before its completion. They are going to potentially, and this is not necessarily how it would work out, but they would potentially be reliant on Paulson and whomever is put in charge of that project by him to complete the facility after the sale.
Who's going to own the facility?
Who will own the facility is a question. Will it be Merritt Paulson? Will it be the new owners? Will that ownership pass on to them? Will it be completed before the ownership transfer is done? That seems incredibly unlikely, as somebody who is going to marry someone that works in construction and knows how slowly construction works in this world. Particularly high-level construction projects like that, like a professional sports team's training facility, right?
Right. And, there are certainly questions about whether they're going to be building something from scratch, whether they're going to take an existing facility and update it as they did with the Timbers. Those kinds of things can affect timelines. But yeah, they're not going to have a new training facility next month. That is not going to happen. They're probably not going to have one by this time next year, basically, regardless, just because of the timeline of these sorts of things. And so I think that's a very, very fair question in terms of how the timing is going to work out. And how the ownership issues would work out. Is it a good idea? If Peregrine, Merritt Paulson's entity, is going to own the new facility, is that a good idea? Is that a fair proposition to have another instance in which the Thorns would be essentially leasing something from Merritt Paulson's entity? And does that faithfully adhere to Merritt Paulson's commitment to divest himself from the team? All very fair questions. And I think we don't have a lot of answers to them. But even then, in the reporting, I know they're saying they're down to a couple sites, but I keep going back to the fact that they've been considering sites for a long time. Like, that doesn't scream to me that this is in, or at least that doesn't demonstrate conclusively to me that this is in a significantly different place than it's been for, at least half a decade. And so, we'll see. But yeah, I think your inference in terms of the significance of the statement and what they were saying with respect to whether or not a new buyer has been identified, I think that was more or less the phrase. Intentionally sort of worded, it seems to be ambiguous as to whether or not a buyer has been identified. But it does seem that it's their intent to move forward with this, and I think that just begs a whole series of questions.
Yeah, and on the sale front, I have asked the team and the club repeatedly for updates on the sale of the Thorns, and have not yet received information on that, on who the potential buyers are, beyond the previous reporting we've done on the group led by former Nike executive Melanie Strong. Don't know if they're still in the mix, if they are leading the way, if they're in advanced negotiations, who other potential buyers are. where the price is set, although we've seen a range of numbers starting around the 60 million range back when this was first announced, when the buzz was a little bit buzzier on this subject. But it's been pretty quiet on this front, and this is the first major Thorns related item that the club, in terms of off field decisions, has spoken out about since the controversies, since Merritt stepped down as CEO, since he announced that he was going to sell the team. And between that, there hasn't been an update on the sale, which I think concerns fans. I think it concerns players that, the process may not be moving at the pace that they like. And, that's a different subject, what they want to happen versus what is realistic. But beyond the realism of it, there have been numerous and very public talks about the OL Reigns sale, which was something that
we know a lot more about Michelle Kung's investment in Olympique Lyon, and the effect that that's going to have on OL Reign and the transition of ownership there than we do about the Thorns. And I think that speaks volumes.
And the Red Stars have not provided much in the way of updates in their sale either. But my understanding, based on conversations with people in the league, is that the Red Stars sale is further along than the Thorns one is.
Which, honestly, I know I've made this point a couple times in the past. That's crazy. That's crazy. Do you know any person who would be more excited about buying the Chicago Red Stars than the Portland Thorns? I mean, does that make any sense at all? The Thorns are the most successful club in league history. The Red Stars are one of the least successful clubs from a commercial perspective. They've been okay on the field, but from a commercial perspective, one of the least successful clubs in league history. And yet,
the Thorns are the biggest winners there. They have the most people in the stands on average, save for LA, which is obviously a gigantic market and a different animal altogether.
And a new team,
marketing and media standpoint, and a new team
coming in at a very, very different time. But I mean, Chicago, in terms of the soccer market, the Fire haven't figured it out, even though they're now playing at Soldier Field. There are a lot. I mean, there are a lot of questions about investing in the Red Stars. The Thorns are a slam dunk. The Thorns are the safest investment in NWSL. And
largest fan following. Yeah.
I mean, the new owner is going to walk in and immediately have 18,000 fans in the seats. That's a pretty darn good place to start. There's more to do, and there are other issues to tackle, but that's a pretty darn good place to start. Folks in Chicago ain't going to have that. They ain't going to have anywhere near that. They're barely going to have a quarter of that. And yet that sale is farther along than the Thorns.
Right. And the business aspects of a sports team do not, come down solely to the butts in the seats, but that's a big factor. And
it's an especially big factor in NWSL.
It is. And there's a lot more there with the Thorns in terms of their success from a business standpoint, from an on-field perspective. They're the winningest club in NWSL history. They got the most championships. They got the biggest star in the league in Sophia Smith. I mean, what more do you
for
want?
The moment.
So that's what is interesting about this sale process is we haven't heard anything specifically, obviously, but they have spoken about wanting to keep the ownership local, for it to be local business people, for it to be local investors or people with local ties that care about maintaining the Thorns place in the community. How does that work in a city like Portland, right? Who are those people? Who are those millionaires and near billionaires that would be able to invest? Look, there are a lot of different people. There's former executives at the sports world, in technology. There's athletes that make a whole bunch of money that could throw some money at it. Diego Valeri was just here. Maybe he wants to throw some cash at it. Damian Lillard, he might not want to be here very long, but he makes as much in 1 year as the Thorns would cost to buy outright. So
at least toward the end of his current contract. But
well, he'll be making like 60 mil at the end of that contract for Miami, allegedly. Maybe
Or-
he's not going to
whoever.
leave. Who knows? It's been taking a while.
Somebody's going to pay him $60 million.
Somebody will pay that man 60 M's at age like 36.
Not bad. Not bad.
That's a good salary. But no, the in all seriousness, there's a lot of questions right now about the sale for the Thorns, and we don't know when we're going to start getting answers.
And this is going to end up having both. And when I say this, I mean all of these things are going to have an on-field impact at some point. We've already seen it with Haran. She was very clear that this was a factor, seemingly a significant factor, in her decision to stay in France rather than return to Portland. And I think it would be incredibly naive to think that it would not be a factor in terms of re-signing for other players, right? If they have...
Yeah, that's actually something that verbatim, what you just said is what came out of Bella Bixby's mouth. And I wasn't able to include that specific aspect of her quote in the story, but that is something that she and both Megan Klingenberg and others who've spoken privately on the issue have talked about. The idea that, retaining players is going to be more difficult with a turf field. I'm not saying that this is going to factor into her decision, but Sophia Smith's contract is up after next year.
Which, by the way, I mean, this gets into GM stuff. The Thorns cannot allow Sophia Smith to enter a contract here. They have to extend her, or they have to move her.
Yeah, well, they definitely want to extend her. That's my understanding, and they
want
because,
schmont.
Yes,
though. I mean, that's sort of the point. Like, want is one thing. The ability to do that is another thing altogether. And whether they have that ability or not, I think is an open question. And that is an imminent question. Even though her contract isn't up until the end of 2024, you cannot allow Sophia Smith to enter a contract here, because just with the nature of soccer moves, a player's value tanks in their on sort of the market. A player's value tanks in their contract year. And the reason is because every potentially buying club is like, do I want to pay a bunch of money to get her now? Or should I just wait till the end of the year and get her for free and just sign her to a contract?
Yeah, and Thorns fans don't want to imagine a scenario where Sophia Smith walks
would be,
at age 24.
It would be general managerial, ownagerial malpractice to allow Sophia Smith to walk for nothing. Malpractice.
This is a very far future, but
it's not. Probably, I mean, this issue is now. I mean, they need to extend her now, or they need to make a decision about what they're going to do this offseason. This is the moment in which that call needs to be made, and you have these questions up in the ether while this issue is hot. And so, I don't see these things, and we certainly don't know a whole lot about sort of the status of a lot of the other Thorns contracts, but it's for any contract that's going to be up in the next 15 or 16 months, these are big questions. And so that's why, I mean, this isn't just kind of hypothetical head scratching about the future. Like, this could have on-field impacts, and it could have on-field impacts pretty soon. Because if Sophia Smith right now is saying, I don't want to resign unless there's going to be a training facility, then the Thorns need to seriously consider either A, whether they can deliver on that, and if they can't, B, whether they should move her this offseason. Because that'll be their last chance to get any value. Otherwise, you're staring straight in the face of Sophia Smith, honest to goodness, one of the best players in the world, walking for free.
Yeah, look, let me be abundantly clear. They are going to do everything that they can to re-sign her, and to do so quickly. They're working on that, from my knowledge, and that's a scenario that I don't think that they are going to allow to get close, given her importance to the city and to the club and to the sport in general.
Takes two to tango, though.
It does take two to tango, and the issue with the turf is something that I think affects current players, but also affects future potential players, right? Players you want to make a transfer for or sign. to build this team out in the coming years as veterans like Megan Klingenberg, like Becky Sauerbrunn, like Christine Sinclair start to ride off into the sunset. You want to be able to attract players who aren't worried about their longevity playing on a turf field, practicing on a turf field as well. One note that we didn't mention, but I think is important, is that the Thorns are the only team in NWSL to train exclusively on turf. There are some that train on both, and there are some that train only on grass, which is the preferred method of everybody. If you talk to any soccer player out there, professional or otherwise.
And
the quote that I want to get to from Megan Klingenberg on this subject that I think is important came at the end of my story. You can read it at OregonLive.com if you want to read this quote, but I'll read it aloud on air. Don't get me wrong. We love being here, Megan Klingenberg said. We love this team. We love this group. We love the tech staff. The reason that we're all still here on turf is because we want to be here, because we know this team has the ability to be the very best team in the world on any given day. We are on the path to excellence. We just want our club to be on the same path. That to me says what the mindset is for this group, because Kling is not somebody that would come out and provide that perspective without knowing that that's truly how everybody, if not most everybody on this team feels, right? And so these players are currently in a position where they are sacrificing the day-to-day toll on their bodies in order to build what they believe can be something great. But the onus, according to Klingenberg, according to all these players, is on ownership and on the front office at PTFC, whomever is in charge, to make this move to not only get them a practice facility, but to make the switch to grass, which, I didn't in the story get too deep into that can of worms. I do plan to open it and examine it and like shake all the worms out on the table, in the future as we know more from the club's perspective about why the turf question is so complicated. There's a lot of issues that we can get into on a different podcast, but many of them are preventing that from happening right now. But yeah, look, these players are making the sacrifice, and they're doing so because they believe in the future of the club and building something of a dynasty here, right? If they win a championship here this year, next year they might lose a player or two to retirement or to another opportunity because, they could get big money elsewhere as a young or coming into their prime player. We don't know the contract situations, but whoever's shuffling in and out, whoever you have, you keep the core together. You maintain the culture that the veterans on this team have established. You're talking about a dynasty in women's soccer in the United States, and that is a very special thing, not only just for the fans who get excited because the team wins, but for the players, for the city, for the people who are making money from it. Let's be real. It's a very profitable thing to be a dynasty.
Sure.
So take a look at all the other pro sports in this country. You can make some bank winning rings and in this sports world. So, if they want that to happen, the players are being straight up. They're saying, you got to do this. You got to make this investment now. It should have happened years ago, but we're not worried about that anymore. It's time to show up.
There is one thing and one thing only that every dynasty ever on the history of the planet has in common. They've all come to an end. And the simple reality is there were a lot of years in the past in which some of these issues with the Thorns were not huge issues in terms of recruitment because, frankly, there were bigger issues elsewhere. And the Thorns presented a better situation in many respects than other NWSL clubs and, frankly, even most clubs overseas. That is increasingly not the case. Period. They are being and have been passed. And if they are not going to compete, if they're not going to have equivalent or, and I emphasize, or better facilities than these other places, that dynasty will end, and it'll end in not the distant future. And so that's the task now. And I think the writing is very, 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 very clearly on the wall about that. But that's the task.
The Portland Timbers played an exciting match
Fun
on
game.
Saturday.
Fun game.
Yeah, really, really fun game. Diego Valeri honored before and during halftime, enters the Ring of Honor. And, as Sebastian Blanco said, it was a night for the older guys. Or what was the quote that he had? It was it was
for the old school, I believe.
The old school. That's right. He said it was a night for the old school because
Dyrone scored, he scored, and Diego Char got a yellow card.
Yeah, that's exactly
an undeserved yellow card, by the way. But
sure, he would argue that for almost every, if not every single card.
Most of them have been deserved. This one was kind of BS.
Yeah, he'd say he's never earned one. But the game was exciting. It was fun. Dyrone Espria with a brace in the first half. He was on hat trick watch until Gio took him out in the 60th or so.
Tradition like no other.
A tradition like no other in Portland Timbers soccer. But not for a lack of looking out for Dyrone, because he's coming off of injury and not quite 90 minutes fit yet. So you don't want to push him too hard, especially since he's going to be important to what they do in Leagues Cup, which is coming up. We will talk about that, of course, later on. But, this match in particular, 3-2 win over Columbus, it had all the elements of the Portland Timbers season in one, right? You've got the overperformance to start the match where they're up 2-0 and you're like, whoa, they're blowing the doors off of them. They're, putting themselves in great positions to score. They're moving the ball well. Frank Boley's ball ahead to Dyrone Espria.
That was one of the best individual plays of the season.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Boley bringing the ball down, putting it into space with one touch off of that throw-in, which is a difficult ball to handle. And then the outside of the boot, early ball over to Espria to put him in on goal. Yeah, brilliant. I mean, probably the single best individual play of the season.
Right, and Boley has, as an aside, really come into his own in the last few weeks, and I think been a consistent and positive contributor for the Timbers. Something that Ned Grabavoy and Gio and everybody involved are genuinely excited about. They signed him through the end of this season and are looking to potentially bring him back next year. I think he's definitely earning that opportunity to come back next year and compete for the top striker spot with a now healthy Felipe Mora. Who will obviously be even healthier next season, barring any setbacks in his recovery. So he's been good, and so that was the first of the elements, right? This overperformance of what we've seen lately. Then there was the signature backslide. It went from 2-0 down to 2-1 before half, and you're like, like they might be letting these boys back in the game, and then just an unbelievable goal to make it 2-2.
But also a goal that Lucas Zelarayan is going to score most of the time. Maybe not most of the time, but a lot. Like if you get him in that kind of space, 25 yards out, that guy, in particular, he's really good, and he's really good at hitting balls from distance. He's going to put some in. And so that was trouble from the moment he got into that space.
Yeah, it was. And so the Timbers were in trouble at that point. It was one of those, oh God, here we go. Bill Oram was at the game next to me for that one, and he was like outwardly predicting that the Timbers were going to lose the match. And you know what? Like,
and to be honest, they were getting pumped. They were kind of getting crushed really for 15 or 20 minutes there.
It was really bad, and I was inclined to agree with him at that point. Bill can occasionally be bombastic, let's say, on certain takes. I love the man. He's a wonderful guy.
It's his job.
It is his job indeed to have takes. But, I thought at the moment that he was correct that, they were going to lose like 3-2 and that was going to be that. And then Seba scored. And then the entire axis of the game shifted to a late exciting moment, which is the third element of the Timbers season so far. And that is temporary respite, hope that exists in a very tiny little vacuum, right? Because yes, it was the old school. Yes, it was this nice revitalization of the Diego Valeri era. Those are two guys in Dyrone Espria and Sebastian Blanco who were integral to that era, and who played with Diego and have love for him. Asprilla was playing with a heavy heart himself. One of his friends in Colombia passed away 3 days before this match, and he goes out there and is able to perform and score 2 goals. So kudos to him for fighting through those emotions. And it was a classic game. It was a classic and fun game, but then you come back to the stone cold reality, even though that game was kind of a microcosm for the season. It was not representative of the season by any means. The season so far has gone the way of that second element, of the backslide, of the given points away, of the disappointment that has happened when the Timbers have been healthy, when the Timbers have been injured. It's just not gone the way that they've wanted it to go. So now they have the Leagues Cup. They have this match against San Jose on Saturday, and they play Tigres on the Wednesday after that. That presents them an opportunity to regain their form in games that do not count for the MLS regular season standings, so that when they come out of this, whether it's after a lengthy break, if they get eliminated, which they don't want to, they want to play their full first team and play for victories in this tournament. That's something that Gio has said explicitly this week. If
every game is a final, etc.
Every game is a final. Yeah. But, whether they come out of this tournament with a deep run or get eliminated earlier or whatever, they want to utilize this stretch as an opportunity to make that necessary final push to not just get into the playoffs, but get into a better position. That is something Gio is saying, but the performances and effort from players on the field has not consistently lived up to that expectation in the weeks prior to this 3-2 win against Columbus. You don't want to write off a win like that as a potential one-off, but given how the season has gone so far, that is the more likely eventuality than them improving their form in this Leagues Cup and then riding that momentum into a playoff appearance and even a deep run as they've had in the past as underdogs. So what is your perspective then on this Leagues Cup, Chris? Just given
I don't really care about Leagues Cup.
Okay.
I mean, Leagues Cup for me is it'll be fun. I'm looking forward to watching Tigres come to Providence Park. If the Timbers get out of the group, I'm looking forward to seeing who they'll match up against. It's just fun to see the Timbers play against teams that they don't ordinarily get to play against. But competitively, how much do I care about Leagues Cup? MLS and CONCACAF Champions League are tops. US Open Cup is a step down from there. Leagues Cup is a couple steps down from there. And then the preseason tournament maybe is one step down from there. So one step above preseason stuff, but a couple steps below everything else competitive that the Timbers do over the course of the season.
So you don't think this is gonna be something that's a fun and exciting way to compare the two leagues? Because that's kind of the attitude.
No, it absolutely will not be a way to compare the two leagues. I mean, look, Liga MX teams are in preseason. This is not going to be the peak Tigres team that you would expect to see maybe in November or next spring, right? In March or something like that. And they're just getting into camp. I mean, this is a preseason tournament for Liga MX teams. And so is it a way to compare the leagues? Absolutely not. Is it a way to give MLS a bit of a leg up in terms of competition with Liga MX, where they've been generally beaten up during CONCACAF Champions League? Yes, it is. I think that is precisely the design. MLS folks have been complaining for years about the fact that the CCL games that they play against these Mexican teams are, coming right at the beginning of the season, even sometimes during preseason, and how that doesn't put them in a good way to compete against Liga MX and sort of establish their continental dominance or whatever that is. This is exactly the shoe being on the other foot, right? And that's the point. And that's why this tournament is happening. This is a glorified preseason tournament for Liga MX teams. It is, of course, I think, a big economic opportunity for both Liga MX and MLS, and we'll see if it turns into something bigger at some point down the road. I don't know if it will, but we'll see if it does. It's a fair question. But in terms of how much I put competitively in the Timbers, having a group stage against San Jose Earthquakes team that they play a couple or 3 times a year already, and then a Tigres team, fun and very talented but in early preseason, I don't put a ton of competitive stock in it. I think in terms of the Timbers, and just because of where they're at, and this sort of goes back to the conversation about the game against Columbus, I think it's kind of important for them just because they need to be able to show the kind of fight that they had in the last 20 minutes or so against Columbus consistently, because they're going to need that kind of attitude and that kind of buy-in. They're going to need all 90 minutes in every MLS game from here on out if they want to do shoot this year. They're probably not going to do shoot anyway, but if they even want to have a prayer, that's what we're going to need to see. And so for me, coming out of the Columbus game, in terms of talking about hope, the hope isn't so much in the result, right? I mean, that was a game that they needed to win, but they need to win a lot more games in order to be even marginally relevant. And so, that's not what gives me hope. What gives me hope is the way they reacted after Columbus drew level. That was good. That we haven't seen that so far this year with any regularity. And the way they played in those last 20 or 30 minutes, even before Seba's goal, I thought was much better and was the kind of thing that they're going to need going forward. And it wasn't, it sort of fell to him at the back post, but it was sort of fitting that on Diego Valeri's night, in which he was being very rightfully celebrated, that it was Sebastian Blanco that scored the winner. That was great. That was awesome. And you could see how much the goal meant to Seba. The parallelism between Seba taking off his jersey and showing it to the crowd, with Diego Valeri doing the same thing back in, what was it? I think 2018, when his future with the club was in its own right uncertain, even at that time, before the Timbers ultimately signed him to an extension later that year, in 2018 or 2019. Memory gets hazy over the years. I think that was 2019 when that happened, but the parallelism was really obvious, right? I think even the Timbers probably in a moment of unintentional drawing of this parallel sort of showed them side by side. When I think there's significant doubt now about Seba and what he's going to do next year. But the respect that he was showing to the fan base, the respect that Diego Valeri showed, and the love, frankly, that Valeri showed for the supporters and for the Timbers Army, I think all of that was very fitting and very touching. But the bigger point for the team is that it is going to take that kind of an effort that they showed at the end of that game, in every minute of every game going forward. And that's kind of got to start now, right? You're not just going to be able to flip that switch when you go to Houston on August 20th, which is, I think, their next MLS game. That's going to need to start now in these Leagues Cup games. And so, do I care about the Leagues Cup in its own right competitively? I do not. But in terms of the Timbers, who still sit on 1.13 points per game, which, as we've discussed, ain't shoot, and frankly ain't even close to shoot. They need to be getting into this higher gear now. And so I think these games are important just from a Timbers getting their stuff sorted out perspective.
I saw somebody on Twitter predict in their Leagues Cup bracket challenge, or whatever it may be called, predict a Portland Timbers versus Inter Miami final in which Lionel Messi would, I believe, make a trip to Providence Park, although who knows where that game would be held. My guess would be MLS would rather.
How do you think
in Miami at Hard Rock Stadium?
How do you think the Thorns would feel if they put grass over the turf at Providence Park for a final against Messi in League's Cup?
Look, there's been a lot
like
of
Megan Klingenberg might walk off the like training pitch if that happened.
There's been a lot of foot and mouth disease around these issues over the past few years, but that would be a gargantuan and unforgivable mistake if for one guy, and he's not just one guy. Let's get that out of the way.
Even one superlative guy.
Even one superlative guy. They rolled grass in for that one game, one guy in a new cup for one day, and for years these
and then rolled it right out for Thorns training the next day.
That would be atrocious, and there's no way that would happen. But then the question becomes, okay, well, if that was the final, then would Messi play on turf? So that ties it all together, right? The idea of the turf issue, which the Thorns players have rightly brought up, and this whole Leagues Cup thing, which is very messy,
with a Y,
to say the least. With a Y and with an I. We're bringing Bill Oram style puns in here near the end, but Messi's a big part of it. Look, I mean, the marketing teams at MLS have gone overdrive since he's making his debut tomorrow. Today is Thursday, so Friday the 21st tomorrow in Leagues Cup, he's going to make his debut. Might not start, which is kind of
almost
insane.
Certainly won't start. He's basically in preseason.
Yeah, so that's kind of wild to have El Messi on your bench graphic if you're an MLS team. Pretty hilarious, actually, just objectively, but big moment for the league. Everybody's talked about it ad nauseum. We're not really going to talk about it too much.
It'll be fun
in this space, but it'll be fun. Hey, it's Messi, man. People are going to tune in. There's going to be eyeballs,
and
maybe next year he could play the Timbers, and I'll have an excuse to fly to Miami, or maybe they'll play up here, and he'll have a thigh contusion and choose not to play on the turf, and your $1,000 tickets are going to go down the tube if you're in Portland.
Yeah, I mean, the Messi stuff's going to be fun, and it's fun for everybody, right? Like even the cynics among us, you'll love the fact that Messi, the greatest player to ever play the game, is coming to Miami to play in a temporary stadium in Fort Lauderdale, where like the offices at the stadium are literal, honest to goodness shipping containers. It's like it's just so good. It is so good, and it's got something for everybody. He's a really good player. If you haven't seen him play, he's really, really good. So like, tune in for the games too. But like the vibes are also just immaculate and hilarious.
Capitalism is wild, man.
It is something else.
It is something to behold sometimes. It'd be funny if it wasn't so dark and depressing. But on that note, that will wrap it up for us this week on Soccer Made in Portland. For Chris Reifer, I'm Ryan Clark. Thank you for joining us. Like us, subscribe to us wherever you get your pods. Follow us on Twitter at Soccer Made in PDX, at Chris Reifer, and at Ryan T. Clark. Follow all my work at OregonLive.com.
And get up early to do so.
Yeah, and get up early, because them things are getting scheduled for like 6 a.m. sometimes. You never know when it's going to pop up, when you're going to get that RSS feed notification. Thanks again, y'all, and we'll catch you next week.